Georgia, 1856. Before dawn, a scream tore through the pine fields, a sound not of punishment, but of reversal. When light came, the master lay broken on the ground. His spine snapped like a branch in storm wind. Standing over him was Ezra Daniels, hands trembling, heart still. For years he'd borne every lash, every sermon on obedience. That morning, obedience died first. What they called savagery, history would one day call the beginning of freedom. Ezra Daniels entered the world in a storm that shook the ground beneath the slave quarters. The sky cracked open that night, lightning carving through the pines like a blade, thunder rolling as if the heavens themselves were giving birth. His mother, Ruth, whispered that the storm was a sign, God's warning that the child born that night would not live quietly. Ezra's father was gone before the boy could form his first word. Sold south for a handful of dollars, his name was erased from the plantation ledger like a miswritten line. Ruth told her son his father was, "Somewhere God keeps the strong," but even she knew the truth. In this world, strength was both a curse and a currency. Ezra grew up on the Daniels plantation near Macon, Georgia, a place where children were measured not by dreams but by the weight they could carry. He learned to walk on red clay paths lined with cotton stalks that cut skin like knives. By 10, he was driving oxen through fields that seemed endless. By 12, he could lift a barrel heavier than most men. "That boy could move a barn," the overseer used to say, laughing as if it were a compliment. But it wasn't. Strength, on the Daniels plantation, was another chain, useful, visible, and never yours. The master, Jacob Daniels, was a man who believed in order more than mercy. His plantation ran like clockwork, wound by pain. Every sound had its place: the groan of the plow, the crack of the whip, the hymn sung low at dusk by the enslaved to remind themselves they were still alive. Ezra learned to work without rest, to swallow every word that might sound like defiance. Yet beneath his silence, something grew, a slow, patient weight that even he didn't understand. At night, when the fields turned to mist and frogs sang by the creek, Ruth would hum to him, songs her grandmother brought from Africa. The words had no meaning left, but the rhythm carried a heartbeat older than the land. "Keep it inside," she'd say. "They can take your name, your work, your body, but they can't take what hums." Ezra listened, and the hum stayed. Through every dawn, every blow, every sermon about obedience, it stayed. He didn't know it yet, but that rhythm would one day break a man's spine. Master Jacob Daniels was a man of two devotions, cotton and the Bible. He preached one to justify the other. On Sundays, he gathered the enslaved beneath the oak near the big house and read scripture about obedience. "Servants, obey your masters," he'd thunder, voice thick with whiskey and righteousness. The verses rolled out smooth as oil, but everyone knew what came after the sermon: the demonstration. A name called, a body tied, a whip singing the master's interpretation of divine order. Ezra learned early to bow his head and keep his eyes open. He watched the way Daniel smiled when the lash struck deep, how the crowd of field hands stood still, faces blank, the air heavy with the smell of sweat and fear. The overseer, Mr. Tate, said it was God's work. Ezra wondered what kind of God needed so much blood to keep his world spinning. By 16, his back was a scripture written in scars, each welt a verse, each mark a commandment carved in flesh. He carried buckets of water to the fields, his reflection trembling in the pail. Sometimes he saw the face of the boy he'd been soft, unbroken, and didn't recognize it. Each lash had peeled something away. Still, he endured. He smiled when ordered to. He prayed when told to. But his prayers began to change. No longer for deliverance, but for balance. Not for mercy, but for justice that did not wait for heaven. The master's favorite sermon was about patience. "The meek shall inherit the earth," he said. Ezra thought, maybe, but only after the strong have burned it down. He didn't speak the thought aloud. Words could get a man killed faster than fists. Yet every time the whip cracked, he felt something stir, something that didn't want to be saved, only seen. On one such morning, As the overseer raised the whip against an old man too tired to stand, Ezra caught himself gripping the handle of his hoe so tightly that the wood cracked. No one noticed. He dropped the tool, heart hammering. It was the first time he realized that rage, when caged too long, learns patience. It waits, it studies, it counts, and one day it strikes like lightning. By 17, Ezra's muscles had become both his pride and his prison. He was taller than most men, his shoulders broad enough to cast a shadow even at noon. The master noticed. Visitors noticed. Soon, every time white guests came to Daniel's plantation, Ezra was called from the fields like an exhibition. "Show them what God's made of good stock," Master Daniels would say, patting his arm like one pats a horse before a race. Ezra would lift a wagon axle or haul a barrel of corn until his back glistened under the Georgia sun. The men laughed and clapped, the women whispered in awe. To them, he was a marvel of labor, not a man. "Look at him," Daniels said once, wine staining his lips. "That's what happens when you treat them right, feed them, work them hard. God blesses the faithful." Ezra forced a smile, eyes lowered. Inside, something cold coiled in him. It wasn't shame, it was recognition, the clarity of seeing exactly what they saw when they looked at him. Muscle, obedience, proof. After the visitors left, Daniels gave him a pat on the back and said, "Your strength keeps this place alive, boy. Don't forget that." Ezra didn't forget. He repeated it to himself that night in the quarters, his voice flat. "My strength keeps this place alive." And he wondered what would happen if one day he decided to stop. Strength gave him more work, not respect. He became the plantation's machine, plowing, hauling, carrying logs for new sheds, fixing wheels that broke under other men's weight. When a mule died, they brought Ezra instead. When a man collapsed, he dragged him aside and kept working. Even illness didn't excuse him. He once fainted in the field. The overseer dumped a bucket of cold water on him and said, "You ain't dead yet." That night, Ezra's mother whispered, "Child, the more they take, the more you got to hide." But Ezra had nowhere left to hide. His body was his rebellion, though he didn't yet know how to wield it. Once, during harvest, Daniels called him into the barn for a lesson. He placed a Bible on a barrel and said, "This book tells you to serve. That's your purpose." Ezra looked down, his voice barely a breath. "Maybe it tells you that, not me." Daniels didn't hear him, or maybe he chose not to. The wind outside howled against the walls, and for a brief second, Ezra thought it sounded like laughter. He didn't smile, but something deep inside did a small, dangerous flicker, waiting for a day when silence would no longer be enough. Her name was Leela, and she changed the temperature of Ezra's world. She came from a neighboring estate after her mistress's death, traded like furniture, 2 cotton bales for one woman. She was small, with skin the color of roasted chestnut and eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense. When she first arrived, she barely spoke. But Ezra noticed her in the fields, the way her hands moved gently, even when the soil fought back. One evening, he found her near the smokehouse, humming a tune he recognized, one of those songs his mother used to hum when she thought no one could hear. "You know that one?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "It knows me." From then on, they met in shadows between rows of drying corn, behind the cookhouse, under the stars where the air smelled of smoke and longing. Lila had learned to read from a preacher's wife who had pitied her, and she taught Ezra by candlelight, tracing letters on his palm. "A means beginning," she whispered. "B means becoming." Each letter was a secret shared between them, a weapon carved from words. They didn't dream of freedom, they built small moments of it instead. But nothing stayed hidden for long on a plantation. One night, as laughter slipped too loud through the smokehouse wall, Master Daniels walked in. The lamp shattered against the floor. His belt came off with a hiss. "You think you can take what's mine?" he roared. Lila stepped between them before Ezra could move. The first strike landed on her, then the second, then the third. When it was over, she lay still, breathing shallow. Daniels left without another word. Ezra knelt beside her, his hands trembling. Blood smeared across her cheek and his palms. "I'm sorry," he whispered, over and over, as if apology could build a shield after the sword was already buried. She was gone, by morning sent away, they said, to the fields upriver. No one saw her again. Ezra stopped speaking for weeks. Even his mother's songs fell silent in him. The only sound left was the rhythm of breath and the memory of Lila's voice saying, "A means beginning." That night, when the wind moved through the pines, it sounded like words he couldn't read, only feel. The kind that waited, like thunder before a storm. The year 1855 came colder than memory. Frost clung to the cotton like ghosts that wouldn't leave, and hunger turned from threat to habit. The fields yielded little, and so did compassion. When crops fail, cruelty grows cheaper than grain, easier to harvest. Master Daniels drank more that winter, whiskey replacing prayer, rage replacing reason. Every night, his sermons about obedience grew louder, while the fire in the hearth shrank smaller. Ezra worked through it all. His hands cracked, his breath turned to mist, his stomach hollowed. Yet he refused to strike the mule that faltered beside him, an old creature as broken as the tools they used. Daniels saw it and called it defiance. "You forget who feeds you, boy?" he barked. Ezra answered quietly, "You mean who feeds off me?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence fell so deep the air trembled. Then the pistol came down, not in a shot, but as a blow. The metal handle smashed across Ezra's face, drawing blood that steamed in the cold. The field hands froze, eyes fixed on the dirt. No one dared move. Daniels stood over him, breath sour, eyes red. "Next time you open that mouth, I'll take your tongue." Ezra didn't speak. He just looked calm, unreadable. The kind of silence that unnerves even tyrants. Later that night, by the fire in the quarters, old Isaac muttered, "Boy, you lookin' like thunder waitin' for a tree." Ezra said nothing, but inside, the storm that had named him stirred. The cold months dragged on. Children coughed themselves to sleep. Women boiled roots and called it soup. Even the dogs stopped barking. Ezra carried wood to the cabins, wrapped his mother's shoulders in an old coat, and watched frost climb the walls like white vines. He didn't dream anymore. He waited. He didn't yet know for what, only that something inside was winding tight, like a rope before it snaps. When spring finally came, it brought no peace. Lila's absence hung in the air like smoke that refused to fade. Ezra sometimes thought he heard her voice in the rustle of the trees, whispering those same 3 letters she'd traced on his hand. A means beginning. He looked down at his hands, scarred, swollen, unstoppable, and understood that beginnings sometimes required endings. It happened 2 days before Christmas. The plantation was restless, half-starved, half-frozen, all afraid. Master Daniels stumbled out of the big house before sunrise, still drunk, shouting for Ezra. He accused him of stealing a ham from the smokehouse, though the dogs had eaten it days ago. Ezra denied it once, voice steady. Daniels laughed, a sound too sharp to be human. "So the ox thinks he's honest now," he said. He ordered the overseer to tie Ezra to the whipping post. Mr. Tate hesitated. There was something in Ezra's eyes that morning, a stillness too heavy to touch. "Maybe let him be, sir," Tate muttered. "He's done nothing wrong." Daniels spat on the ground. "Then I'll do it myself." He swung the whip once, the leather sang. Twice the air cracked. The third time, Ezra caught it. His hand closed around the braided cord, and the world went silent. The fire in the forge hissed out. The birds stopped calling. Time itself seemed to lean forward. Daniels pulled, but Ezra didn't let go. He yanked the whip free, the motion effortless, almost graceful. The master stumbled toward him, fury blazing, but Ezra moved first. What followed was not rage. It was inevitability. Ezra's hand gripped the man's throat, his other on the shoulder. A twist, a snap. One sound clean, final, like dry wood splitting under pressure. Daniels fell in a heap, eyes wide, mouth open, spine broken. For a second, Ezra stood there, chest rising and falling, the whip still in his fist. He didn't feel triumph, only an impossible calm, the the same silence his mother's songs once carried. Behind him, the field hands stood frozen, too terrified to breathe. Old Isaac's voice cracked the air. "Run, boy." Ezra dropped the whip. "Now we're even," he whispered, not to them, not to God, but to the wind that had watched everything. He walked toward the tree line, not running yet, just walking, as if leaving work early. The sun had barely climbed above the pines. His hands were steady. The world behind him burned with noise bells, shouting, dogs, but none of it reached him. For the first time, the silence was his. Freedom did not come with trumpets or flags. It came with breath raw, cold, ragged, and the taste of iron on Ezra's tongue. He ran until his lungs burned, until the shouts behind him blurred into the wind. The Georgia pines closed around him like cathedral walls, their needles whispering the only prayer he had left: keep moving. Behind him, the plantation was waking to chaos, dogs loosed, bells ringing, torches flaring. Ezra knew the rhythm of pursuit. He'd heard it all his life from the other side of the whip. But now, it was the masters who hunted, and he who refused to kneel. He crossed through swamps that smelled of rot and gunpowder, his feet slicing through ice water, his clothes heavy with mud. Every branch became a question. Would it hold his weight or betray him? By nightfall, he found refuge under a fallen cypress. The rain began soft at first, then furious. He drank from the puddles, hands trembling, blood mixing with water. Somewhere far behind, dogs howled, losing his scent in the storm. He almost laughed, a sound foreign and cracked, when lightning flashed above. The sky, his first witness, was watching again. 3 nights later, he reached a creek and followed it north, eating roots and frogs, sleeping in bursts. Near dawn, he found 2 figures crouched by the water, a woman and a boy, both barefoot, faces hollow but alive. She raised a stick like a weapon until she saw his eyes. "You runnin' too?" she asked. Ezra nodded. Her name was Ruth, a mother from Alabama, and her son was Caleb, no older than 8. They traveled together in silence, bound by the same unspoken truth. Names didn't matter in the wilderness. Footsteps did. Ruth shared what little food she had, cornmeal wrapped in cloth, and Ezra, in return, carried the boy when his legs failed. The road north was not a road at all, just whispers of freedom shared between trees. Sometimes, they met others, shadows that passed without greeting, faces wrapped in rags, each carrying their own story of flight. At night, they huddled around small fires that dared not glow too bright. Ezra listened to their breaths more than their words. Freedom, he realized, was not a single act, it was 1,000 small refusals: to bow, to stop, to forget. When he finally slept, he dreamed not of the plantation, but of rain washing away footprints, of Lila's hand tracing letters in air, of thunder laughing. In that dream, he was not running, he was walking through an open gate that never closed. By January, the story of the giant fugitive had spread like fire through Georgia's winter fields. Handbills nailed to trees showed crude sketches. Negro man, tall, broad build. Answers to Ezra. A bounty of $200 was offered, enough to make neighbors turn on neighbors. The hunt began in earnest. Posses rode out from Augusta and Milledgeville, armed with rifles and dogs that snarled at shadows. Preachers joined them, quoting verses about justice while polishing their pistols. "The Lord's order must be restored," one declared. But the Lord, Ezra thought, had gone silent the day obedience died. He and Ruth's small group moved through the swamps, careful to leave no trail. They wrapped their feet in moss to hide tracks, rubbed pine sap on their skin to confuse the dogs. Nights were their allies, daylight their enemy. Hunger was constant. Ruth's boy coughed blood, and Ezra carried him through marshes that sucked at his knees. Once, they saw torches glinting across the river, the men close, the dogs whining, but the wind shifted, carrying their scent away. Ezra whispered, thanks to no one in particular. For weeks, they survived on cattails and stolen eggs. Each day without capture was a victory measured in heartbeats. But hope, like fire, needed tending. When Ruth fell ill with fever, Ezra stayed by her side, pressing damp leaves to her forehead. "You go," she rasped. "You still got thunder in you." "I'm spent." He shook his head. "We don't leave our own." But she smiled faintly. "You already left once, that was enough." One morning, as mist rose from the water, Ezra set out to find herbs and maybe a scrap of food. That decision would end his running. Near a ferry crossing, he saw two patrolmen warming their hands by a fire. He turned, but one shouted. The first shot grazed his shoulder, the second shattered the air beside his ear. Ezra plunged into the river, its cold wrapping him like a shroud. Bullets pierced the surface behind him, but the current carried him away, blood trailing like a ribbon through black water. He floated until night swallowed the sky. When he finally crawled to shore, half conscious, he thought he heard thunder again, not in the clouds this time, but inside him. Somewhere behind, the hunt still raged. But in that moment, bleeding and free, Ezra whispered to the darkness, "Let them follow the sound." They found him weeks later, half-starved and half-alive, near Augusta. A trapper spotted him drinking from a ditch and sent word to the sheriff. By the time they came, Ezra didn't bother running. His body had betrayed him, every step heavy, every breath like glass. When the men surrounded him, rifles leveled, he simply raised his hands. The oldest of them, a deputy with trembling fingers, whispered, "Lord, he's a mountain." Ezra said nothing. Mountains don't explain themselves. They chained him in the wagon, paraded him through town like a prize beast. Crowds gathered, whispering about the killer slave, pointing at the wounds, the scars, the height that made him look almost mythical. Reporters scribbled feverishly, eager to turn the man into a monster. The local paper wrote, "Captured, the Negro murderer who defied his master's God." The crowd needed that story to believe the world still made sense, that rebellion could be punished, that thunder could be caged. The trial was swift, a sermon disguised as justice. The preacher sat beside the judge, Bible open, nodding along to the prosecutor's words. Witnesses were called, though none had seen the act. They spoke of Ezra's strength, his unnatural temper, his ungodly pride. One man claimed he'd seen fire in his eyes that day. Another swore he'd heard Ezra boast that no white man could own him. Lies. All of them but lies were easier to sell than truth. When his turn came to speak, Ezra rose, wrists clinking with iron. He didn't defend himself. "He broke me first," he said quietly. "I only returned the favor." The room went still. For a heartbeat, even the judge hesitated as if some small, buried part of him understood. Then came the verdict. Guilty. Death by hanging. They gave him 2 days to wait in a cell, too small to stand straight. The jailer, a boy no older than 20, asked once, "You sorry for what you did?" Ezra looked at him, eyes calm. "You ever see a mule apologize to the plow?" The boy didn't come back after that. On the morning of his execution, the town gathered under the gallows oak. The rope swung lightly in the wind, like a snake testing the air. A preacher read from Exodus about obedience. Ezra listened, face expressionless. When they asked for his last words, he raised his head toward the clouds and said, "That's your gospel, not mine." The hangman kicked the stool. The body dropped, then jerked once. At that exact moment, thunder rolled across the sky, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. Some swore they saw his body twist toward the heavens before it went still, as if greeting the storm that had never left him. They buried him outside town, in a patch of dirt with no marker, just weeds and silence. But storms, like stories, don't die where they're buried. Weeks later, lightning struck the same oak that had held the rope, split it clean down the center. The townspeople whispered, half in fear, half in awe. Each summer after, the lightning came again, always finding the same place, until the oak was nothing but a blackened stump. Old freedmen passing through would point and say, "That's Ezra's tree. It bends to no one now." His name was never printed again in papers. The Daniels plantation changed owners. The ledgers that had once recorded his worth as property were lost in the war. But songs survived, soft at first, whispered in fields. then sung around fires when no overseers were left to listen. They told of a man who took the whip and turned it into thunder, who broke his chains with his hands and his silence. When Union soldiers came through Georgia years later, they heard those songs from the freedmen. One officer asked, "Who was Ezra Daniels?" A woman answered, "The man who made fear run first." He laughed, thinking it legend. But legends, like lightning, don't ask permission before they strike. In time, the story spread north, told in churches, written in letters, half believed and half worshipped. Some said he never died, that he vanished into the storm and still walks the forests during thunder, watching for those who still kneel. Long after his death, when chains rusted and fields grew wild again, a child on a sharecropper's farm asked his grandmother why thunder sounded like wood breaking. She smiled softly and said, "That's Ezra talking." And maybe she was right, because in every story of resistance, there's a moment when fear learns its name, when silence cracks, when a man stands up and the world trembles. Ezra Daniels was that moment, the one that taught thunder how to speak.